The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
So we are here today with Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Rafael, welcome to Titans of Nuclear.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you again.
Yes, absolutely. So you're in the position that, for those outside the nuclear sector may not know, is the absolute top authority in the international world of nuclear. But, you know, we'd love to always hear where people came from originally. You're Argentinian, correct?
I am, yes.
Can you tell us about what your life was like there growing up and how it led you to a world of international diplomacy?
Well, yeah, like you say, I'm a career diplomat. I made it to the top of the career as a diplomat, as ambassador, joined the diplomatic school. And actually from the very beginning of my career as a diplomat writ large, I started working on non-proliferation issues. To give you an idea, I joined the foreign service of my country when Argentina was returning to democracy after a long, dark period of military rule. And as part of that, the foreign ministry was establishing a unit to deal with disarmament and non-proliferation.
And how old were you at this point when this transition
22,
happened in your country?
22.
So this was formative. I mean, this is like, you're at the age where people are deciding, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? And here you have around you all of these political changes happening in your country.
Yeah, I didn't lose a minute. I went to university and then I finished my studies and jumped immediately into the diplomatic school. Some were saying, you're too young, give yourself more time. But I knew what I wanted to do.
And was that true? Was that the same characteristic that you had leading up to that point? Growing up, were you of the mind where if you see your eyes on something, you just go for it, you don't hesitate?
Yeah, that has never changed. I always have a plan. I look ahead, and that was, when this happened. I remember, when the class that was about to graduate from diplomatic school was going to be assigned tasks within the ministry. There was this new unit, and of course, it sounded too techy. Everybody wanted to go to the North American department with the hope to go post it to the United States or the West European. So if you want to go to Paris, you better work there. I mean, this kind of thing.
Jobs, yeah.
We were all young diplomats, and I said, I want to go there. And of course, there were not many candidates. It was only two of us.
Yeah. And
the great thing, and I always say this really changed my life. Yeah. Not only as the professional, I would say, side of it, is that when I joined, my boss there was, at that time I thought he was an old guy, but he was still relatively young in the career, and he had the incredible idea, which has been continued, that for whoever wanted to work on these issues would have to go to the nuclear facilities and institutions of the country for 6 months to be trained, to learn.
Okay.
Which was, of course, it sounds obvious, but you had to do it.
Yeah.
We diplomats, we immediately wanted, to put a nice suit, a hanky, play diplomat. And of course, there I was at nuclear power plants, making friends with engineers, people who were looking. I mean, we didn't know who was the most surprised of the two, if them or me. They were seeing this young diplomat saying, I'm a diplomat, and what are you doing here? And so, but it was fun. You can imagine, it was fascinating for me to be there at fuel. I mean, as you may know, Argentina has a pretty developed, has a closed fuel cycle, so we had everything, even reprocessing at that time.
One of the most advanced nuclear countries in the world. I mean, you guys are the ones that are building medical isotope reactors that go around the world to countries like Australia and Netherlands. Yeah.
So I had this opportunity to see research reactors, nuclear power plants, fuel fabrication facilities, hot cells, radioisotope, everything. So quite clearly that changed my life, because I fell in love immediately with that and with the non-proliferation issues. These were the days that were, of course, also at the global level, all the changes were happening with Gorbachev and Reagan. And so for me, I couldn't imagine that anybody else would choose any other topic. That was the topic. Non-proliferation was the best.
And just to break it out for the audience who might not know, non-proliferation means weapons, stopping weapons. So stopping the spread of weapons. Of course, disarmament is the other side, which is of course very important, but is another discussion if you want. But for us, what was relevant was the non-proliferation part, which goes side by side with another big chapter in my life and in the regions developed, which was all our things with Brazil. Because very quickly we got into this dance with Brazil. You have to remember, both countries were coming from a long period of military rule, both countries with nuclear latency, if you want, both countries against the NPT, all right? The NPT, can you spell that out?
It was another world. It was unimaginable now.
The NPT, that's the Non-Proliferation Treaty?
That's the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And neither Argentina nor Brazil were subscribing to it. Wow. So basically, there were concerns all over the world about that. But of course, with the return of democracy, common sense came back, and the enlightened leadership of both countries decided to move away from that. But that took a lot of effort, as you can imagine. We had to imagine how to put these two countries together, and we came with something which is incredibly original in the form of a binational, the only binational inspectorate which exists.
And that means that Brazil,
that's another matter.
But that's very interesting. So that means Brazil and Argentina are able to kind of look at each other, independent of other organizations that might.
It's not independent; it's together.
Yes.
Argentina, Brazil, the IAEA, and the regional inspectorate, which is called ABAC or ABAC, Argentine Brazilian Accountability and Control Agency, ABAC. They have a quadripartite agreement. So I still say we, I'm no longer there. I'm IAEA, but Argentina sends inspectors to Brazil. Brazil sends inspectors to Argentina. The IAEA is there. Everybody is there. So the whole thing now is being studied, in other regions, in Southeast Asia, of course, and in the Middle East, as an example of what one could have as a way to move forward in the non-proliferation world. So although all this jazz was part of my formative years as a diplomat, so you can imagine
quite a lot of experience.
It was amazing. It was amazing. I was there when the president, imagine, it's like a movie. When the president of Argentina decided to invite the president of Brazil to visit a secret facility where Argentina was enriching uranium. How about that?
Oh my God.
That was historic. That was amazing. In the what Patagonia is, about from being sports clothes. Is a region. It's a huge region in the south of Argentina and Chile, and this facility was, of course, as in a good movie, was in the middle of nowhere.
In the middle of
the
like a secret mountain lair.
In the windy deserts of Patagonia, you had an enrichment facility. So of course, the first president of Argentina's democracy, Raúl Alfonsín, historic figure, said, "No, what is this? An arms race with Brazil?" And so he phoned the president of Brazil and said, "There's something you have to see." and we were there, the diplomats, working with my friends, Brazilian diplomats who are now ambassadors like me, and we are friends, brothers, working together. And we decided to organize this visit. I can tell you that when our delegation arrived at the place, even my connationals were not treating us very nicely. Wow. Of course, because there was this culture of the secrecy, and they were saving the country, and all these things coming from this military rule that we were inheriting. But of course, both countries and the region, because many countries in the region moved on institutionally. So that was part of the beginning of my professional career. And of course, after that, what can excite you?
So after that, you decide to enter into the world stage and decide to bring these. I mean, these are pretty unique skill sets now that you have, but nuclear is an issue around the entire globe. So what was your the next step in your journey?
Well, I was posted. I had different postings. My first was in Geneva, where I was dealing, of course, with many issues related to the Conference on Disarmament, where we were dealing with a number of issues related to nuclear weapons and to non-proliferation, but also to other weapons of mass destruction. My other love, if you want, was chemical weapons. Okay. I also worked internationally in the OPCW for many years. I was the chief cabinet there, and I negotiated for my country, of course, the chemical weapons convention back in the 80s. Then I was in Brussels, and then I worked for the OPCW, which is another important international organization, similar to the IAEA, but
also on chemical weapons.
Chemical weapons. We were doing that organization is very interesting because it's also a disarmament organization. We were dealing with the destruction of chemical weapons stockpiles in the United States, in the Russian Federation, and in other countries as well. So that was a tremendous experience for me. Then I returned to my country, and then I started to move much, much closer to the IAEA, albeit I had been for the first time here in Vienna as a young delegate in the 80s. I came back as a chief of cabinet for my predecessor, for DG Amano. I was his first chief of staff. Okay. Work for the agency in that position for a few years. And then I went back to my national service as ambassador to the IAEA. And then the whole story begins. There's a period there where I was working very actively on other things. I was the chair of the Nuclear Suppliers Group for 2 consecutive periods. And I did, many things internationally until I became a candidate for this position, and I won the elections, and here I am, and here you are.
Wow, I mean, it's pretty amazing. You rushed over a lot of that, but so you would get a lot of firsthand experience, though, at the IAEA before you were just elected to the top role. I mean,
yes, I knew the house.
Yeah, you knew everything. I mean, serving as the chief of staff and then the deputy director general. I mean, you had so much hands-on experience that there's probably nobody better to have taken this position.
Well, but as you know, it was a hard election. Yeah. The history tells, when you look back into the history of the IAEA, that always elections here were always very disputed. And you could be perhaps the most qualified, but then you know what an election is.
Right, it's very political. It's very political at the end of the day. There's member states that have influence and weigh in. So, yeah.
Exactly. And even those, finally, I won nicely. But even those who were not voting for me were saying, yes, Ambassador Grossi, you are so good, but I'm not voting for you. So anyway, I got the more than 2/3 in the end, but it was, and the reason I ran for office here is because I knew the house, I knew the potential.
Yeah.
I knew what could be done. I knew that we had in this institution a formidable instrument for non-proliferation and many other things that we may discuss. And I just thought that I had a number of ideas that I could put into practice, precisely because I knew I didn't need to be trained or educated into
you hit the ground running. You hit the ground running.
Absolutely.
So, okay,
Absolutely.
so tell us a little bit more about what even is the IAEA. I mean, there's thousands of professionals working there from around the world, right?
Yeah, you know, this place, you've been here and you know it. So, you know, this institution is an amazing place where roughly 3,000 professionals from all over the world, And we have like Janus, the Greek or Roman deity, we have like two faces. We have like two faces. One is this political, strategic face that is the one that make us known as the nuclear watchdog.
Right.
We are the inspectors. We are the ones.
That's where you can actually send people around the world to nuclear facilities around the world with clipboards and checklists and, hey, let's take a look under there, and was this tape put on top, and do we have an accurate accounting of this material and that material?
Indeed. Yeah. Indeed, this is exactly, we run an international inspectorate. Yep. And this inspectorate is the one that goes all over the world to all countries, those having nuclear power plants and also those who do not, because there are, wherever there is nuclear activity or nuclear material, we are there. So, so we do this non-proliferation work. So we are trying to make sure that apart from those who have nuclear weapons, there are no more. And this is, of course, a very important part of the mission. For some, the only thing that matters, but for many others, no. And there are other things. Then we have all the nuclear safety, and today, as we speak, we are commemorating, or rather tomorrow we will be commemorating 10 years after the Fukushima Daiichi accident, of course, which is remembered all over the world. So we have a lot of work in nuclear safety, which is so important. Nuclear security as well, you remember, and I'm sure some listening or watching this know, we have all this work on you remember the summits and the protection of nuclear material. That is one thing. And then there is a very important work on technical cooperation, which, frankly speaking, for the majority of the membership of the IAEA is what, for developing countries, is what matters, because we help them in nuclear medicine, we help them in food security, water management. I mean, the array of activities that benefit from here, we do not speak about nuclear energy, but nuclear science and applications. So we are an organization that has a amazing compound of laboratories in the outskirts of Vienna, a few kilometers away from headquarters, in a lovely place called Seibersdorf. There we have an amazing array of laboratories doing all the science for all these projects all over the world. Also, we have our laboratories studying samples coming from hotspots in the world for our safeguards activity. So it is a very unique organization that it's not only pushing paper or debating ideas, it is doing real work, inspecting countries, helping countries in very concrete activities that change the lives of the man or the woman in the street.
Right. You're right. So I think to maybe paraphrase this, it's not just the inspectorate side. Okay, there's paperwork involved in there. That's fine. But it's not just a diplomatic paperwork organization. There's also a research component, almost like a national lab in a sense, in terms of collaborate and communicate and bring together other national labs and allow them to exchange freely the information that will advance nuclear science forward.
Indeed. Indeed, that is the case, and your comparison with the labs is very pertinent, because we work very closely with most, if not all, the national labs in the United States and similar institutions around the world, which value enormously the possibility and the scope they get by working with us.
Yeah.
Because these national institutions, sometimes they have their own international cooperation programs, but by working with us, they have a real global scope, and they can, with us, hand in hand with us, have a bigger reach than doing it nationally, I would suppose.
So, I mean, you touched upon some of the many functions of the IAEA, but I know that there are even more. I mean, I've been to the buildings and see the different columns and all the different areas. How do you personally keep track of it all? And then how do you prioritize? And then coming into this position, what were your top priorities, when looking at such a vast and complex organization?
Well, you have to have a 360-degree approach here, because what may matter for one country as the central issue that they want the agency to be looking at, and you can imagine politically, let's not put names. There are some countries that they only care about the IAEA if the IAEA does this or doesn't do that. But for other countries, it is more on the assistance and the cooperation side. And I am everyone's DG. And I have to make sure that every country feels that the IAEA is there for them.
Yeah.
So what really the work is as fascinating, as comprehensive, as exhausting, because you never stop. You can't stop. There's always something coming which is tremendously urgent. Let me, since we are having this conversation at a time of a pandemic, which is quite unique event in our lives. Your life, my life, everybody else's. We have been helping a lot on COVID-19. People perhaps would be surprised, but of course, RT-PCRs are based on nuclear techniques, and we've been distributing PCRs all over the world. 128 countries have turned to us for help. Wow. So we are training them. We are sending the equipment.
This is like a testing tool for COVID.
It's for diagnosis.
Yes. Okay.
And with an RT-PCR, you can make twice or even more as much tests as with traditional techniques, which of course, given the nature of this virus, is essential in attacking it, in mitigating it, and eventually in defeating it. So we were there immediately, offering countries this possibility. And you have to think, and this is what is so important when you analyze the work of an international organization, that there are countries, I'm talking about countries, where they didn't have a single RT-PCR, which in the United States, you may have 25 in a small health unit of the smallest town of a medium-sized state.
Yeah.
Whole countries with 10 million population, not a single.
Wow.
So we were there for them, and we are still doing this.
And this is because I guess there's a few dots that we should connect for our audience. So first, the IAEA is part of the United Nations. It's part of the same organization.
Well, we are not within. We are part of the international system, but we are an autonomous international organization.
But there is a mandate of world good that runs through. And then also you guys have a lot of medical knowledge and medical expertise, because nuclear has a lot of medical crossover as well, whether it's isotopes for imaging or for tools for cobalt-60 for sterilization of medical equipment. There's just a lot of crossover between medical and nuclear, and so naturally there was expertise in-house that you could call upon to help the world crisis.
We have top-notch experts in the area. We have a flagship program called PACT, for Program of Action on Cancer Therapy, and we are helping countries all over the world. We have a big program on human health. where we are working, like you were saying, on cardiovascular diseases, as you can imagine, with cardiac imaging, with myocardial perfusion done with radio tracers. We are working on even on neurological pathologies. I mean, the work is simply amazing in so many areas, where we do the calibration and dosimetry for radiotherapy units for all over the world, so they don't burn patients. Yep. So many countries don't have these capabilities. And here we have them in cyber, so we do it for free for them. So the service in terms of health is really very important. So you can imagine why I was saying that for some in the, I don't want to name names, but in some small country in the center of Africa, to be honest, the Iran issue or the JCPOA is not the most important.
Right. Everyone's got different priorities. And at the end of the day, since you serve everyone, you have to balance all of these priorities. You
have to balance all of that, be present for all, be mindful.
It's almost like, the president in the United States has to be the president of all the states. You're the president of this international organization. You have to be president of the whole world in this regard.
Well, exactly. If you look too much to technical cooperation, those who believe that non-proliferation is the reason of being, is the raison d'être, as the French say, is the reason of the existence of this, will not like it. So you have to, be as much as you can, be present for all in every department. If you want, our organogram reflects that. We have a department for nuclear energy, we have a department for technical cooperation, another department for nuclear applications. If you use the image of a president, I have my ministers and my cabinet or my secretaries dealing with all these issues, and we have to make sure that we deliver at the end of the day.
Now, before the COVID pandemic started and you had assumed this position, there was probably a different set of priorities, and hopefully the pandemic will be winding down soon. We have vaccines, and so hopefully we can get back to some of our other world priorities as well. Namely, one I can think of, climate change, is the other big issue that we have to deal with here. Can you tell me about where some of those priorities overlap, and what some of your efforts around nuclear energy and climate change have been?
Of course. Well, that is very important, and I think you yourself have been lecturing about this, so I know how important your own contribution has been on this matter. It is obvious that I think the difference I brought as a DG is that I am very vocal on the importance of recognizing that nuclear has a place at the table. I'm not a nuclear lobbyist, but nuclear has a place at the table of energy efficiency and at the table of climate change. Yep. My first trip abroad was to the Conference of the Parties of the Climate Change Convention, the COP, the so-called COPs, yep. The COP25 in Madrid, against the advice of many around me who were saying, no, don't go there. This is a place where nuclear energy
and why? Will be. Why has nuclear energy been historically, excluded from some of these conversations, given obviously its contribution to clean energy is so profound? And what can we do to try to change that narrative? I mean, I know you're showing up, which is definitely the first step. And like, it's crazy other people wouldn't want you to show up. I mean, that's just called being a leader and being brave and making sure that nuclear has a voice, or it should have a voice. So
it's a mix. It's a mix of it's a mixed bag of perceptions, prejudges, also commercial interest, ignorance as well. You have in the pot, you put a little bit of that, and the end result is a bad one. Yeah, of course. So what we say is that we want an enlightened, science-based discussion of what are the advantages, and perhaps for those who don't want to, as I say again, we are not a nuclear lobbyist. We are saying nuclear energy is a positive contribution. It is already, we know it, and the facts are saying that. It is not a simple conviction or an ideology. that we are pushing for. So in terms of what can be done about this, I think the important factor here is information, education, and never be afraid of a good debate.
Yeah.
I think one has to also be a little bit from the nuclear sector, which has been where I have been working for 40 years. There has also been some moments where from the nuclear sector there was a bit of opaqueness, maybe a tad of arrogance by saying, we know better, it's obvious, or to close oneself up to this debate. I think it's important, whenever, of course, there is a respectful and correct debate, to talk to those who may have a negative view and go down. These days, of course, around Fukushima, we are having lots of discussions, and still today there are people, talking about completely fictitious figures about cancer and things like that. We all know that there's no proof of any death caused by radiation effects in Fukushima, which took claim the lives of thousands in Japan.
It's amazing. And on that note, though, don't you think then, because I know another big role of your organization is to shepherd newcomer countries through the process of acquiring nuclear energy for the first time.
Yes.
Given what we've learned from Fukushima, and that not a single person died in the case of a meltdown, which we thought of as, surely this horrible catastrophe that must be avoided at all costs. Now that we're able to recalibrate the actual risks, and of course it's still horrible, but now that we're able to recalibrate the risks, is it possible that certain countries that have a lot of other problems to deal with, air pollution that kills, kills millions across the world every year, is it possible that we can recalibrate our perception of risk with nuclear energy to make it easier for them to acquire nuclear energy faster, such that they can mitigate some of these other more pressing and much larger health issues that they're dealing with today?
I think we are seeing, Brett, we are seeing that already.
Yeah.
In my position, I talk to lots of policy decision makers, ministers, and it's amazing, the amount of people, especially ministers of energy from developing countries, that are eager to see the possibility of small and medium-sized reactors, because they are looking for solutions.
Yes.
And solutions are not easy. And at the same time, they know and they are aware of their climate change emission responsibilities that they have. And to be honest, they are not. You don't have 1,000 solutions out there. So what one see is this. It is a trend. There are, of course, financial aspects that need to be taken care of, and this depends, in energy, not nuclear energy, but in energy in general, there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Each country has a configuration of human resources, technical resources, natural resources, financial resources that is going to come to play in a different way. So this is why sometimes when I listen to some presentations, I'm a bit, surprised by the simplicity of what is being said. There are countries where the opportunities lend themselves to this much easier. There are countries that have access for political reasons, are closer to certain vendors, and we see this when you look at the so-called newcomers, in the jargon, as you know, these countries that are coming to nuclear. You will see some that have closer relations with one or the other vendor, and they can arrange themselves in a different way. So I think that each case merits a separate analysis. But what we see, and for the benefit of our conversation, which is of course more general, what we see is that there is a trend there, which is very interesting. That looks at nuclear energy as a very interesting option for those who haven't. Yep. And for those who are dealing with a problem, it is an obvious choice.
Yeah.
Take China and others. I mean, and these countries are doing this because they know that it is the sustainable solution to economies that are so coal dependent that they have to, if they want to do something about it, they need dispatchable energy, they need reliable energy that is going to be there all the time. And what I think it's very important is not to pitch one, and as you know, I come from a soccer country, as if it was a team against the other. You know,
right. No, that's
it's nothing like that.
Yeah.
It's really nothing like that. It depends of your capabilities. There are countries where hydro is an obvious choice. There are countries that don't have anything of that, and they will be turning to nuclear more easily. And in those cases, the IAEA will be there. You were pointing out to this assistance we give to newcomers, which is very important because we are looking into, you know, each step. We have like a Bible that we call the milestones document.
Yeah,
I'm
the
sure
phases. We call them phases when we talk about it sometimes too, right?
Exactly. So then the institutions, the political class learns what is necessary at every step of the way. The importance of an independent, strong regulator, the importance of having an infrastructure which is able to support the effort, these kinds of things.
And when you talk about infrastructure, you mean both human resources as well as, you know, further electrical infrastructure as well. There's almost two sides to that coin in terms of the things that are necessary to integrate nuclear into a country's energy portfolio.
Indeed, the infrastructure thing is extremely important, is one of the things that countries are looking at. But mind you, when you look at new types of nuclear reactors, like the small, medium-sized, modular, and even micro reactors, they are also a very efficient solution for those countries having a fragile grid or problems of long distances, isolated places that need to be, powered in one way or the other. So I do believe in a very interesting, active. I don't want to use words like bright because it sounds too commercial, but clearly an active, important, constructive role for nuclear energy in years to come, no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I remember, and I have to thank you for inviting me out to speak at the climate conference that you guys hosted. I mean, this was now, feels like forever ago, but a year and a half ago or so. Amazing opportunity. And just to show the leadership that you guys are starting to take now with respect to climate conversations more broadly. And you've got one coming up as well, right? And there's going to be the UN climate conference. You want to tell us about what's happening there?
Well, there are a couple of things that I could mention. One is, of course, this global, international, the COP26, which is going to take place in Glasgow. So it's organized by the United Kingdom, and we are working with them. So this is not a meeting for nuclear energy. This is a meeting for climate change, the convention. But we are going to be there to engage with that community, with the energy and climate change community all over the world, to make sure that the voice of the nuclear sector is heard, and that we can engage, as I was saying, in a constructive conversation with all these, as they say these days, these stakeholders. I mean, all of those who are in one way or another involved, including those who may have very critical views about nuclear energy. Why not? So that is one thing, and we are preparing ourselves for that. And the other thing is a nuclear-specific conference, and I think it's important for you, Brett, to be aware of this, because this is going to take place in the United States. As you know, there is a traditional conference on nuclear energy that takes place every 4 years, more or less. There was one in China, one in France, one in Russia, and the last one was in the United Arab Emirates. And the next edition will be in the United States, in Washington, COVID allowing, end of October. Maybe it could be moved to next year if that is not. But this is the big rendezvous for everything nuclear. And I'm very happy to be working with the Department of Energy and the State Department organizing this, and also with nuclear industry. The other thing I wanted to mention is this. The IAEA now is working very closely with industry. In the past, there was a little bit of apprehension. I don't think there needs to be really none. I think that we recognize our respective roles, but it is good for us to be working with them because we are the norm setting, if you want, global institution. And of course, we want the industry to thrive and to work and to be comfortable with the norms we are promoting.
Yes,
so
and there's a bit of back and forth. There has to be communication both ways because the industry is on the ground, right? They understand, what the problems and challenges are, and it might be something small that, small and easily fixable, but that the industry isn't in a position to correct. So, so they've got these insights, and then you guys, in setting the norms, need insights. So there has to be this, this communication both ways in order to be able to make a more productive move forward.
Well, exactly. I couldn't say it better, but it wasn't happening.
Yeah, I know.
Or it was happening in a very haphazard way without a systematic, and I'm really reaching out to them.
Yeah.
Talking to them. I've been in contact already by now in my year and 2 months in the job. I've been talking to almost all the most important CEOs in them, and they are very welcoming. They were surprised because they were not used to the DG of the IAEA reaching out to them saying, here we are, if you have a problem, let's talk. I have also established an excellent contact with WANO, the World Association of Nuclear Operators, which is a very discreet technical association that's a lot of good, because they are working really without any political attachment or agendas. They are an apolitical institution that makes the connection among all the operators in the world. And of course, I think we all have to benefit from working together. So I'm trying to reach out to them. I hope they will see this. The new IAEA is working in an open way, trying to offer whatever we can put on the table for everyone's benefit at the end of the day.
Yeah. It's interesting. You've been in this industry for 40 years. I've only been introduced to nuclear for the last 3, but already in these last 3 years, I feel like I sense some momentum building. I feel like I see there's like this newfound energy almost to bring solutions forward and to almost reclaim the idea that nuclear used to have, like all the way back in the 60s, where it's like this magical technology that was going to really increase prosperity, right? I mean, like part of the original mandate of the IAEA and the Atoms for Peace program from the US was to spread nuclear technology around the world, and I feel like it's almost coming to fruition now. Do you have that same sense that the momentum is building?
We have, there was here, I would say the following. A few years ago, there was talk about this nuclear renaissance.
Yeah.
Some were saying, well, here's nuclear roaring back.
Yeah.
From this past where it seemed to be the solution for everything. I tend to try to take a view that has to incorporate everything that has happened, the good and the bad, the fulfilled promises and the unfulfilled promises as well. Perhaps people were expecting too much of nuclear energy. Nuclear energy could not be the magic wand that would solve the world's problems in terms of energy. And perhaps all those who now say, well, it was too good on paper and it never happened. I think that it is that if the metric is solving the planet's need for energy, perhaps is too high a bar. At the same time, this catastrophism for nuclear was equally unjustified and not based in any scientific. Of course, if you hate nuclear and you believe that is the source of all evil, there's nothing really that one can do in terms of a rational conversation. I think that always, and perhaps my profession as a diplomat, we diplomats are always looking for the median line.
Yeah.
Exactly, compromise.
Yes.
And I think nuclear has a lot to give. Where do you put that? I don't know. Let's work day to day. Nuclear is there, is a reality. That is also something that should be said. Some people say, well, it's a solution, but all these problems, and I remind them that nuclear is already doing all these things for us. Yes. Were it not for nuclear, the climate change crisis would be a climate change disaster.
Yeah.
You don't have it because many countries, in the United States, for example, or in France, or in China, and in India, in many countries, you have nuclear already mitigating the
air pollution as well. We can quantify, how many lives nuclear has saved just from, offsetting, potential air pollution from coal plants.
Exactly. You are right. By any metric, it is that. So what we want is a serious conversation, knowing that nuclear has a lot to put on the table, and ultimately this is a market economy, and in most of the places where nuclear is deployed, and that will have its own logic. But the issue is there, the solutions are there, and I hope the world will benefit. I'm running this institution, and the statute that I have to abide by, and upon which I was sworn in, says that we have to enlarge the benefits of nuclear energy and technology for the largest number. And this is what we're trying to do, Brett.
Okay, Rafael Grossi, thank you so much for taking the time today. It has been an amazing conversation. I have to say, when you first got elected, my whole team, we were up and cheering. And so we cheer for you to continue your leadership, and just thank you for everything that you do.
That's very kind, Brett. I enjoyed it, and I hope to see you soon. Yes. Thank you very much.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.